China's bold gamble. Why Beijing is betting big on Afghanistan's future. In a world where most nations have turned their backs on Afghanistan, one global power is doubling down on a partnership that many consider risky at best and foolish at worst. That power is China. While Western nations imposed sanctions and froze billions in Afghan assets, Beijing took a different path entirely. In October of this year, China made a stunning announcement. Every single Afghan product, 100% of all tariff categories, would now enter Chinese markets completely duty-free. No taxes, no barriers, full access to the world's second-largest economy. But this isn't just about charity or goodwill. Behind this extraordinary gesture lies a complex web of strategic calculations, untapped mineral wealth worth trillions of dollars, and a geopolitical chess game that could reshape Central Asia for generations to come. So what's really happening here? Why is China investing so heavily in one of the world's most troubled nations? And what does Afghanistan, a country that can barely feed its own population, actually have to offer the world's rising superpower? Before we dive deeper, if you appreciate in-depth geopolitical analysis like this, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We bring you stories that mainstream media often overlooks, and your support helps us continue this work. Now let's unpack this fascinating story, the aftermath of America's longest war. To understand China's current strategy, we need to rewind to August 2021. After 2 decades of military occupation, American forces withdrew from Afghanistan in a chaotic exit that shocked the world. The Taliban, the same group that had been ousted in 2001, swept back into power with stunning speed. But America didn't just leave Afghanistan militarily, it also cut the country off economically. Nearly $10 billion in Afghan central bank reserves held in U.S. financial institutions were immediately frozen. International aid, which had previously accounted for roughly 75% of Afghanistan's public spending, evaporated almost overnight. Western sanctions created a financial quarantine around the country. The economic devastation was swift and brutal. Afghanistan's banking system teetered on the edge of collapse. Government salaries went unpaid for months. Essential services ground to a halt. Prices for basic goods skyrocketed while employment opportunities vanished. Families who had grown accustomed to some degree of stability during the occupation years suddenly found themselves facing uncertainty on a scale they hadn't experienced in decades. Today, 3 years after that withdrawal, Afghanistan remains in economic intensive care. The country's entire GDP stands at just $17.23 billion as of 2023, roughly equivalent to the annual revenue of a single large American corporation. More starkly, per capita GDP sits at barely $493 per person per year. To put that in perspective, that's less than what many people in developed nations spend on their monthly phone bills. Afghanistan now ranks among the absolute poorest nations on Earth, competing with countries like South Sudan and Burundi for the unenviable position at the bottom of global development indices. China steps into the void. While most of the international community maintained its distance from Taliban-ruled Afghanistan, China saw something different. An opportunity. Even before the dust had settled from America's withdrawal, Chinese diplomats were already in contact with Taliban leadership. Beijing didn't waste time with ideological debates about the legitimacy of the new government or demands for political reforms. Instead, China focused on practical matters: humanitarian relief, economic stabilization, and the potential for long-term cooperation. The initial assistance package that China provided was substantial by Afghan standards, though modest for a power of China's size. More than $66 million in emergency humanitarian aid. This wasn't just cash transfers. It included tangible, life-saving supplies that ordinary Afghans desperately needed, food staples to address widespread hunger, winter clothing and heating supplies for harsh mountain winters, COVID-19 vaccines during a global pandemic when Afghanistan had virtually no access to immunization programs, and essential medicines for hospitals that had been stripped bare. But China's engagement didn't stop at emergency relief. Beijing also committed to infrastructure projects that would have lasting impact. Repairing irrigation systems and water facilities damaged by decades of conflict, supporting the reconstruction of Kabul Republic Hospital, a critical medical facility for the capital city, and providing assistance to Kabul University, helping to ensure that Afghanistan's next generation wouldn't be entirely lost to the chaos. These weren't flashy mega-projects designed to grab international headlines. They were targeted interventions aimed at addressing Afghanistan's most pressing needs while quietly building goodwill with the new government. The numbers tell a story of growing partnership. What started as humanitarian assistance has rapidly evolved into something far more substantial, a genuine economic relationship. The trade statistics between China and Afghanistan over the past few years reveal a dramatic acceleration in economic ties. In 2022, China exported $553 million worth of goods to Afghanistan. Everything from construction materials to consumer products that Afghans couldn't produce domestically. Meanwhile, Afghanistan managed to export just $42 million worth of products to China, creating a massive trade imbalance that highlighted just how dependent Afghanistan had become. But by 2023, something remarkable happened. China's exports to Afghanistan more than doubled, surging to $1.269 billion, a jaw-dropping 130.9% increase in just 1 year. Even more significantly, Afghan exports to China also jumped substantially, reaching nearly $64 million, representing a 52.4% year-over-year growth. These aren't just abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. They represent real economic activity. Afghan farmers finding markets for their products, Chinese construction firms building roads and buildings in Afghan cities, supply chains being established where none existed before, and jobs being created in a country where unemployment had been catastrophically high. And then came the October announcement that took this partnership to an entirely new level. Zero tariffs. Understanding what this really means. When the Chinese ambassador to Afghanistan posted a photo from his meeting with Afghan Acting Deputy Prime Minister Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar and announced the zero-tariff policy, many observers initially missed the significance of what had just been unveiled. Let's be clear about what 100% zero-tariff treatment actually means in practical terms. Every single product that Afghanistan can produce, whether it's agricultural goods, textiles, handicrafts, minerals, or anything else, can now enter China's massive consumer market without paying a single yuan in import duties. For Afghan exporters, this is transformative. It means their products can compete on price with goods from countries that have far more developed industries and infrastructure. The policy covers an extraordinarily broad range of categories: construction materials, which Afghanistan desperately needs to develop, energy products, from traditional fuels to potential renewable resources, consumer goods of all varieties, agricultural products beyond just the famous pine nuts, and manufactured items once Afghanistan develops the capacity to produce them. Early indicators suggest this policy is already having an effect. Afghan exports to China increased by 11.5% in the months following the announcement, and projections suggest that figure could reach 25% growth by next year as Afghan businesses and farmers adjust to the new opportunities. For a country as economically devastated as Afghanistan, these percentage increases translate into something incredibly valuable: hope. Hope that there might be a viable path toward economic recovery that doesn't depend on Western aid or the opium trade that has long plagued the country. The pine nut puzzle. what Afghanistan is actually selling. So what exactly is Afghanistan exporting to China right now? Well, the answer might surprise you. It's pine nuts. Lots and lots of pine nuts. Afghan pine nuts have actually become something of a phenomenon in Chinese markets. These nuts, which are harvested from pine trees growing in Afghanistan's rugged mountains, are prized for their flavor and quality. Last year, out of the $64 million in total exports from Afghanistan to China, a staggering 90%, so that's roughly $58 million, came from shelled pine nuts alone. Chinese consumers have developed a real appetite for these products. In supermarkets across Beijing, Shanghai, and other major cities, Afghan pine nuts command premium prices. They've become a popular snack, an ingredient in traditional dishes, and even a health food that's marketed for its nutritional benefits. For Afghan farmers in provinces like Nangarhar and Paktia, the Chinese market has been a lifeline. Families that might otherwise have turned to poppy cultivation for income instead found they could make a decent living harvesting pine nuts for export. It's provided legitimate employment in regions where economic opportunities are scarce and where, honestly, the temptation of illegal drug production has historically been strong. But here's the critical question. Can pine nuts alone justify China's massive investment in Afghanistan? The honest answer is no. While the pine nut trade is certainly economically meaningful for the Afghan farmers and traders involved, $64 million in annual exports barely registers as a rounding error in China's multi-trillion-dollar economy. Beijing imports more than that in coffee beans or wine from individual provinces in other countries. So if it's not really about pine nuts, what's driving China's strategy? The answer lies not in what Afghanistan is currently exporting, but in what lies beneath its mountains and deserts. Afghanistan's hidden treasure. 3 trillion reasons for China's interest. Afghanistan may be one of the poorest countries on Earth when measured by GDP, but beneath its war-torn surface lies wealth that could rival the treasuries of entire nations. The country actually sits atop some of the richest and most strategically valuable mineral deposits on the planet. Let's start with the basics: oil. Afghanistan's proven oil reserves currently stand at approximately 3.6 billion barrels. That's not quite Saudi Arabia-level reserves, but it's far from insignificant. More importantly, for a country that currently imports most of its refined petroleum products, developing domestic oil production could be transformative for energy independence and government revenues. But oil is just the beginning of the story. Afghanistan's mineral wealth is where things get truly extraordinary. The country has iron ore deposits with exceptionally high purity, averaging 69% iron content, which is remarkably rich by global standards. The total reserves are estimated at a staggering 42 billion tons. To put that in perspective, that's more than the iron ore reserves of mining powerhouses like Brazil and Australia. If these deposits could be effectively extracted and processed, Afghanistan could, in theory, become one of the world's major iron exporters. Then there's copper. The Ainak copper deposit alone, which is located in Logar province about 30 kilometers southeast of Kabul, contains proven reserves of 11.5 million tons of copper. This actually makes it the world's second largest copper deposit. And in an era where copper demand is surging due to electrification and renewable energy technologies, since copper is essential for electric vehicles, wind turbines, and solar panels, this resource is increasingly valuable. Afghanistan also has substantial zinc deposits with 38% zinc content, significant lithium reserves, cobalt, and perhaps most strategically important of all, rare earth elements. Rare earth elements are a group of 17 metallic elements that are critical for modern technology. Everything from smartphones to missiles, from electric vehicle motors to wind turbine generators. Currently, China dominates global rare earth production, controlling roughly 70% of mining and over 90% of processing. But having access to Afghanistan's rare earth deposits could further strengthen China's position in this strategically crucial sector. The United States Geological Survey has estimated that Afghanistan's total untapped mineral wealth could be worth approximately $3 trillion. That's not a typo. 3 trillion, with a T. That's roughly 175 times Afghanistan's current annual GDP. It's wealth on a scale that could fundamentally transform the country if it could be successfully extracted. But here's the catch that has prevented this wealth from being realized. Afghanistan lacks virtually everything necessary to extract these resources. The country has almost no mining infrastructure, limited technical expertise, inadequate roads and railways to transport extracted materials, insufficient power generation to run industrial operations, and until recently, no political stability to enable long-term development projects. This is precisely where China sees its opening. China's track record. From agreements to action, China isn't approaching Afghanistan's mineral wealth as just a theoretical opportunity. Beijing has already begun turning plans into reality. In 2023, China National Petroleum Corporation, or CNPC, which is one of the world's largest oil and gas companies, signed a landmark 25-year exploration and development agreement with Afghanistan's Taliban government. The deal focuses on the Amu Darya Basin in northern Afghanistan, near the border with Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. CNPC committed to investing hundreds of millions of dollars to develop these oil fields, but the agreement went beyond just extraction. Critically, CNPC also committed to building Afghanistan's first domestic crude oil refinery. This isn't just about extracting resources and shipping them to China. It's about helping Afghanistan develop the capacity to refine its own petroleum products, reducing its dependence on expensive imported fuel. The Amu Darya project has already begun generating results. In its initial phase, the project has brought more than $40 million in revenue to the Afghan government, money that has gone toward paying civil servant salaries and funding basic services. For a government struggling with cash flow, this has been a significant boost, but the oil project is just one piece of a larger puzzle. During recent high-level visits between Afghan and Chinese officials, Taliban representatives raised an even older agreement, the Anak copper mine deal. Back in 2007, during the government of President Hamid Karzai, Chinese companies won the bidding for the rights to develop the Anak copper mine in a deal valued at approximately $3 billion. Some estimates put it as high as $5 billion when including infrastructure commitments. At the time, it was hailed as potentially transformative for Afghanistan's economy. But then everything fell apart. The security situation in Afghanistan deteriorated. Taliban insurgents controlled much of the countryside. International sanctions created legal complications, and the mine site itself, located in an active conflict zone, became too dangerous for sustained operations. For over 16 years, the Anak project sat in limbo, a symbol of Afghanistan's unrealized potential. Now, with the Taliban in government control and Afghanistan's security situation more stable than it has been in decades, however one might judge the means by which that stability was achieved, the project is being revived. Construction on access roads to the mine site has already begun, and Chinese companies are conducting updated geological surveys and planning for large-scale extraction operations. The infrastructure challenge, connecting Afghanistan to China. Here's an interesting geographical fact that shapes everything we've discussed. Afghanistan and China share a border. It's not a large border, just 92 kilometers along a narrow strip of mountainous terrain in Afghanistan's far northeast, but it exists. That border runs through a region called the Wakhan Corridor, a finger of Afghan territory that stretches eastward between Tajikistan to the north and Pakistan to the south, eventually touching China's Xinjiang region. Currently, despite sharing a border, China and Afghanistan don't actually trade directly across it. There are no roads, no border crossings, no customs facilities. Instead, all trade between the two countries must follow a circuitous route. Goods are loaded onto trains in China, transported through Kazakhstan, then through Uzbekistan, and finally reaching Afghanistan at the Hairatan border crossing, a journey of thousands of kilometers to connect two countries that, theoretically share a border. During the recent visit by Afghanistan's energy minister to China, Taliban officials explicitly raised the possibility of opening the Wakhan corridor for trade. From Afghanistan's perspective, the benefits are obvious. Direct access to Chinese markets would dramatically reduce transportation costs and time, a land route that doesn't depend on relations with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and the potential for Afghanistan to become a genuine bridge between China and other parts of Central and South Asia. For China, a Wakhan corridor route would also offer advantages: a more direct connection to Afghanistan's mineral resources, reduced dependence on transportation routes through former Soviet republics, and another option for the Belt and Road Initiative's pathways through Central Asia. However, and this is significant, China has been notably cautious about committing to develop the Wakhan corridor route. Beijing hasn't rejected the idea outright, but neither has it embraced it enthusiastically. Why the hesitation? Several factors are at play. First, the Wakhan corridor is extraordinarily remote and rugged terrain. Building roads through this high-altitude mountain region would be an engineering challenge of the highest order, rivaling some of China's most difficult infrastructure projects. Second, and perhaps more importantly, China remains uncertain about Afghanistan's long-term stability. While the security situation has improved compared to the chaos of the occupation years, questions remain about whether the Taliban government can maintain control, prevent the emergence of extremist groups that might threaten Chinese interests, and provide the kind of stable business environment that major infrastructure investments require. China is particularly sensitive to security concerns because its Xinjiang region, which borders Afghanistan, has its own complex ethnic and religious dynamics. Beijing is wary of any instability in Afghanistan potentially spilling across the border. Belt and Road. Afghanistan's aspirations meet China's caution. Afghanistan's desire to join China's Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, represents both the promise and the complications of the current relationship. The Taliban government has been explicit about its ambitions. During the Belt and Road Energy Ministers meeting that preceded the Zero-Tariff announcement, Afghan Energy Minister Abdul Latif Mansour directly expressed Afghanistan's interest in becoming a formal BRI participant. From Afghanistan's perspective, BRI membership would bring multiple benefits: access to Chinese financing for infrastructure projects, integration into the broader network of Belt and Road countries, enhanced legitimacy on the international stage, and the possibility of becoming a transit corridor connecting China to other South Asian markets. However, China has not extended a formal invitation for Afghanistan to join the Belt and Road Initiative. Instead, Beijing has maintained what might be described as constructive engagement without formal commitment. This cautious approach reflects several concerns. The Taliban government, despite controlling Afghanistan, still lacks diplomatic recognition from most of the world, including China. Beijing maintains an embassy in Kabul and engages with Taliban officials, but hasn't formally recognized the government. There are also concerns about the Taliban's ability to provide security for major Chinese investments and personnel. Several Chinese nationals have been killed in attacks in Afghanistan and Pakistan in recent years, incidents that have made Chinese companies understandably nervous about sending large numbers of workers to the region. Additionally, China is aware of the reputational risks. The Belt and Road Initiative has already faced criticism about debt sustainability and environmental impacts. Expanding into Afghanistan, a country where governance structures are weak and international oversight is minimal, could provide ammunition for BRI critics. So China appears to be taking a wait-and-see approach, engaging economically with Afghanistan through trade and selective investments, but stopping short of the kind of massive, transformative BRI projects seen in Pakistan or Central Asian countries. Beyond resources. The broader strategic picture. While mineral wealth and trade opportunities are significant factors, China's engagement with Afghanistan fits into a broader strategic framework that goes beyond economics. First, there's the security dimension. Afghanistan shares a small border with China, but more significantly, it borders Pakistan, a key Chinese ally, and sits near Central Asian countries where China has substantial economic interests. An unstable Afghanistan creates security risks that could potentially affect China's western regions and its Central Asian partnerships. A stable Afghanistan, even one governed by the Taliban, may be preferable to continued chaos from Beijing's perspective. Second, there's the diplomatic aspect. By engaging constructively with Afghanistan when Western powers have largely disengaged, China positions itself as a more reliable partner for developing countries. This reinforces Beijing's narrative that China offers an alternative model of international relations, one based on mutual benefit and non-interference rather than political conditionality and democracy promotion. Third, the Afghanistan engagement demonstrates China's long-term thinking. Western countries often approach developing nations with short-term aid cycles and political demands. China, by contrast, seems willing to make multi-decade commitments, like the 25-year oil development agreement, that acknowledge the reality that transforming Afghanistan's economy will take generations, not years. The zero-tariff policy in context more than just Afghanistan. Here's a crucial piece of context that often gets overlooked in discussions about China's Afghanistan policy. The zero-tariff treatment isn't actually unique to Afghanistan. At the September 2024 Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit held in Beijing, China announced a sweeping policy commitment. It would provide 100% zero-tariff treatment to all least developed countries that have established diplomatic relations with China. This policy covered 33 African countries initially, including nations like Niger, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Somalia, and others.